The void of space was never truly silent. Beneath the vacuum's cold serenity, a war raged that sent shockwaves through the fabric of the Orion Arm. The battlefield hung between the burning wreckage of two fleets, shattered fragments of metal, and flesh drifting like a grim confetti across the stars. At the heart of the carnage loomed the Dominion dreadnought Vanguard's Wrath, its jagged black hull pulsing with deep violet energy, scars glowing red-hot from a battle that was far from over. On the command deck, lined with dark obsidian panels etched in glowing alien glyphs, stood Warlord Arzalth of the Sixth Dominion, conqueror of 15 worlds, executioner of the Helion Uprising, the butcher of Karos Station, Arzalth's. 6 glimmering eyes narrowed, each focusing independently on the tactical displays. His exoskeletal armor, fused directly to his dermal plating, hissed softly as it flexed. A neural tether fed real-time updates directly into his cerebral cortex. Hull damage at 4%, forward cannons recharged, fighter squads Gamma and Theta in formation. Yet his focus was locked on one anomaly, an aging human warship drifting defiantly through the chaos, the Valiant Hope. A cruiser too old to pose a real threat, too damaged to stand, and yet it refused to die. He watched, transfixed, as the human ship, its starboard engine coughing plasma, launched another salvo of kinetic spears and magnetically accelerated rail charges, punching clean through one of his drone frigates. That ship should have fled hours ago. Instead, it pressed forward, breaking formation and ramming an enemy cruiser at near light speed in a suicidal final act. The Dominion's tactical AIs flagged the maneuver as irrational. Arzalth felt something stir in the back of his mind, a whisper of unease, not fear, no, not yet, but a growing awareness that these humans did not follow the algorithmic predictability of other species. He turned from the display and marched to the viewport, each step clanging like thunder on the plated deck. The stars beyond shimmered, but his eyes locked on the human vessel, flickering, flaming, breaking apart in sections, and still pushing forward. Imagine you are on that dying ship, the heat rising, the deck trembling, friends, family, your whole crew falling one by one. And you know the odds. Know you won't live to see another sunrise. But you still fight, not for survival, but because surrender is simply not in your blood. On the Valiant Hope, Commander Saria Vega barked orders through the smoke-filled bridge. Blood ran down her temple, one eye swollen shut, a broken arm held to her chest with a torn strap of her own uniform. Her crew was down to 1/3, fires raged, hull breaches tore through compartments, but her voice never trembled. Target, their main reactor. "We die before we bend," she said, her voice raw with exhaustion, steel hard with resolve. A young ensign, barely out of the academy, turned to her, lips trembling. "Commander, they're too strong." Vega's eyes burned. "Exactly, and that's why they'll never understand us. That's why we fight." Meanwhile, aboard the Dominion ship, Arzalth observed the moment with a predator's intensity. His command officers, creatures bred from a dozen warrior species, urged him to finish the job, launch a quantum detonation and erase the cruiser from existence, end the anomaly. But Arzalth hesitated, not out of mercy but curiosity. In over 3 centuries of warfare, he had seen enemy forces surrender when facing certain destruction, had crushed empires in days. The humans were different. They weren't fighting for territory, not for resources, not even for victory. They were fighting because they refused to do anything else. Before we jump into this epic tale, subscribe to XenoChronicles for the most intense sci-fi battles, legendary warriors, and universe-shaking wars. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and join the fight. He remembered the fall of the Zarin Collective, who had laid down arms at the sight of his planet breakers. He had watched the cryo-cities of the Mirkani burn to ash with a single ion wave. But humans, they sang while dying. They laughed with broken ribs. They recited ancient Earth poetry over comms as they bled out on ruined battlefields. A transmission burst through the comm grid, unauthorized, defiant. Arzalth's translators converted the human voice into a deep, calm tone, full of resolve. To the commander of the Dominion fleet. This is Commander Vega. You may destroy this ship. You may silence our voices, but you'll never erase what we are. We are humanity. We have endured extinction before. We've burned our own skies and rebuilt from ash. Surrender is not in our nature. And if you think death will win this battle, you don't know us. Arzalth stood frozen. The bridge fell, silent. Even the Dominion's war-hardened lieutenants looked to their leader, confused. A moment later, the valiant Hope launched its final gambit, a precision EMP pulse, generated from a hacked fusion core, detonated point-blank. The blast arced across space, shorting the Vanguard's Wrath's primary sensor grid. For 17 seconds, the most powerful warship in the sector went blind. In those 17 seconds, 5 human corvettes, hiding in debris clouds, slipped through the chaos and boarded a supply barge, an act of pure audacity. Rage and curiosity collided in Arzalth's mind. He had underestimated them. Again, no other species had ever made him feel this unsure. "Prepare a boarding operation," he growled, his voice like volcanic gravel. "I will see these warriors myself. I will learn their secret. If they will not surrender, I will force their truth from them." Gravity tethers unspooled from the Dominion dreadnought as the Warlord marched toward the dropship hangar. He no longer sought to crush humanity. Now, he needed to understand them, and somewhere deep in his alien heart, a question sparked like a fuse. What if the strength of humanity lies not in what they fight for, but in how they never stop? The Dominion dropship Nightfang thundered through space like a metallic beast loosed from its cage. Its angular hull, layered in obsidian alloy and etched with the sigils of conquest, sliced through clouds of floating debris. Inside, the atmosphere throbbed with tension. The vessel's interior was bathed in a dim violet hue, emergency lights cycling slowly, casting war shadows across the walls. Arzalth stood at the front of the cabin, towering over his legionnaires, each one bred for violence, spliced with DNA from the galaxy's fiercest predators. And yet none spoke, not because of discipline, but because of the presence of the Warlord himself. He tightened the straps of his war harness, plasma axes magnetized to each forearm. His breath rasped through his rebreather, an ancient relic of the First Dominion Age. He was not just going to kill, he was going to witness. He needed to understand. The boarding clamps locked with a bone-deep clang against the side of the Valiant Hope, and artificial gravity fluxed. The boarding tunnel extended with a slow metallic screech, sealing the two ships in an unnatural embrace. Arzalth's boots hit the human deck first, and he paused. The air was dense with smoke, scorched circuitry, and something unfamiliar. Iron mixed with salt and something bitter. Blood and adrenaline. The corridor ahead was in ruins. Bulkheads, scorched, wires sparking from above, a lone light flickering like a dying star. Signs of resistance, scorch marks from plasma rifles, defensive barricades hastily constructed from scrap hull plating, still smoking piles of Dominion bodies. The humans hadn't run. They hadn't tried to hide. They had made a final stand here, and some had won. His second-in-command, a towering four-armed brute called Zarxul, snorted. Futile defense, no strategic value. They should have surrendered. Arzalth crouched near a fallen Marine, an older man, skin darkened from burns, but his grip still firm around his rifle even in death. No, not futile. This wasn't strategy. This was something else. Deeper into the ship they advanced, section by section, facing ambushes that made no tactical sense. Single Marines holding entire corridors with little more than desperation and explosives rigged to coolant pipes. Arzalth watched one young soldier, barely out of adolescence, detonate himself rather than be taken. The blast tore through the walls, shredding two of Arzalth's warriors instantly. The Warlord emerged from the fire unharmed, visor cracked, chestplate scorched, hands silent. He walked alone into the engineering bay, a cathedral of destruction. Massive turbine cores glowed dimly, as emergency power kept the ship alive by sheer will. There among the smoke stood Commander Vega. Her left leg was wrapped in torn cloth, and her sidearm was aimed not at Arzalth, but at her own reactor core. One wrong move and she'd detonate the ship's last energy reserve, vaporizing everything in a 20-kilometer radius. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice hoarse, eyes unwavering. "You would kill yourself, just to deny me a victory." Arzalth's voice was low, almost reverent. "You would destroy your crew's last hope, erase your own name from history. Why?" She didn't lower the weapon. "Because you still think this was about victory. That's your first mistake." Arzalth stepped closer. "Then what was this about?" Her eyes, bloodshot and shining, burned with a fire no Dominion plasma ever could. "It's about choice. We choose to fight, even when the odds are 100-1, even when our backs are against the void, even when we have nothing left but the memory of Earth and a heartbeat." Her hand trembled slightly, but her grip never loosened. "You call us weak, but we outlasted our own extinction events. We cracked the surface of our own moon before we knew if we'd survive the journey. We created gods in machines and still believed in the human soul." Arzalth looked around. The walls were blackened, the systems failing, the crew dead or dying. But the spirit that permeated this place was like an infection, one that crawled under his armored skin. It made him question everything he had been raised to believe. Dominion doctrine had always been clear: crush resistance, enforce obedience, extinguish rebellion. But this wasn't rebellion, it was revelation. Behind him, Zarxul growled, impatient. "She stalls. Kill her. Reclaim the deck." Arzalth raised a hand. "No." His voice held weight now. Not just command, but contemplation. "She is not stalling. She is showing us why we will never truly win." He turned back to Vega. "You would have made a formidable Dominion general." Her lip curled in disdain. "I'd rather die as myself than live as one of you." He paused. "That may be your greatest weapon, and our greatest weakness." At that moment, a soft rumble echoed through the ship. A beacon, human reinforcements warping into the sector. Impossible. The Dominion fleet had intercepted all signals. And yet, across the stars, somewhere out in the dark, humans had heard their cry. "Reinforcements?" Zarxul hissed. "How?" Vega smiled, her bloodied teeth flashing. "Because someone always answers. That's who we are." And suddenly, Arzalth understood. Not the tactics, not the strategies, but the truth. Humanity didn't win by being stronger. They won by enduring. They planted flags on planets that tried to kill them. They built homes on barren rocks. They fought not because they expected victory, but because surrender had no place in their lexicon. And for the first time in his long, brutal career, Arzalth felt small. The Dominion fleet outside began to shift formation, disoriented by the sudden warp spikes on the edge of the system. Human dreadnoughts emerged, some old, some jury-rigged, some never meant for battle, but loaded with refugees turned fighters. No great navy, just people, fighting back. Inside the valiant Hope, Commander Vega collapsed to one knee, finally succumbing to her injuries. Arzalth stepped forward, lifting her without hesitation. "You've earned your life, Commander," he said quietly. "And something more." She looked up, confused. "What?" "A legacy," he replied. The wounded silence aboard the valiant Hope was shattered by distant rumblings, like the beating of war drums in the void. Outside the shattered viewports, flashes of sublight fire bloomed across the stars as human reinforcements poured in, their warp signatures chaotic and uncoordinated, but burning with raw purpose. It wasn't a fleet, it was a rally. Civilian, haulers retrofitted with gunports, dismantled mining ships repurposed for kamikaze runs, cargo freighters painted with the slogans of dying colonies. They came with no battle plan, only resolve. On the Dominion command channels, static-laced alarms flooded Arzalth's neural link. Reports from his armada: 20 vessels breached, 6 lost, another dozen in disarray. Human forces were not advancing like a proper military. They swarmed like wildfire, unpredictable, uncontainable, and yet they moved with purpose, as if guided not by orders but by belief. Standing in the ruins of the Valiant Hope's engineering core, Arzalth stared at the pulse of the dying ship's core reactor, its slow, rhythmic hum eerily reminiscent of a heartbeat. Commander Vega had lost consciousness in his arms, but her words echoed louder now than any Dominion command. "We fight. Not for victory, but because surrender isn't in us," Zarxul growled from behind. "The fleet requests orders. We must retreat and regroup." Arzalth didn't respond, not at first. His gaze drifted over the chamber's scorched walls, the bullet-ridden control panels, the graffiti etched into the metal by some young crew member in a moment of quiet rebellion. Still alive. Still fighting, still free. "What is it you see, Warlord?" Zarxul hissed, his tone strained between reverence and impatience. "I see something we were never taught to understand," Arzalth murmured. "Something the Dominion could never predict. You speak of weakness, emotion, chaos." "No," Arzalth said sharply, "I speak of will. The humans fight as one. But not because they are ordered. They bleed for each other, they die for each other, not for gain, not for conquest, but because they choose to. That is not chaos. That is power." For the first time, doubt rippled across Zarxul's hardened face. Dominion training had no language for such concepts, no room for empathy or sacrifice. They had purged those weaknesses long ago, but what if what they had deemed flaws were in fact the key? Across the bridge of the Vanguard's wrath, Admiral Corell, third in command of the Dominion fleet, appeared via holo transmission, his voice sharp and venom-laced. "Warlord Arzalth, we request immediate withdrawal. Human forces are swarming Sector Epsilon. We have taken losses unacceptable to doctrine. Your delay is risking further compromise." Arzalth didn't flinch. "Losses are the price of enlightenment." "Enlightenment?" Corell hissed, his mandibles twitching. "Have you gone mad? These creatures are pests, disorganized, primitive. We should have eradicated them by now." "They are primitive. And yet we are the ones retreating," Arzalth replied coldly. Corell's form shimmered with disdain before vanishing. Arzalth clenched his fists. Something had shifted within him, not weakness, something deeper, like a tectonic shift, in the very bedrock of belief. He turned to Vega's crumpled body, her breathing shallow, chest rising and falling with defiance, even in unconsciousness. He knelt beside her and spoke, not for her to hear, but for the truth that had taken root inside him. "Your kind defies logic. You sacrifice everything for others. You fight until your bones break and your stars burn out. You refuse to submit, even when broken." He stood slowly. "And now I must make a choice, one that no warlord before me has made." Outside, in the cold vacuum of space, Dominion ships began retreating, some without orders, others simply unable to hold their formations. The human vessels did not pursue in rigid lines. They flanked, scattered, drew fire to shield wounded allies. A freighter with massive solar sails rammed a Dominion destroyer, detonating its own core. No protocols, no fear, only will. Back aboard, the Vanguard's wrath, Arzalth returned alone, carrying Commander Vega's unconscious form in his arms. The silence that greeted him was not fear, but confusion. His warriors parted instinctively. Never had a warlord carried an enemy. Never had they seen hesitation on the face of the Dominion's greatest champion. In the war chamber, the ship's AI flared to life, requesting orders. Arzalth looked out upon the chaotic dance of battle one last time, and then he said the unthinkable, "Cease hostilities." The AI hesitated. "Directive unclear. Did you mean reallocate fire patterns?" "No," Arzalth growled. "I mean stand down. Send the command. Cease. All. Hostilities." Across the fleet, Dominion captains balked. Some refused. Others, loyal to Arzalth's name, obeyed. The battlefield froze in stages, like the galaxy itself was holding its breath. For the first time in recorded Dominion history, a truce was called, not from weakness, but from recognition. Back in the ship's infirmary, Arzalth stood over Vega's still form. He didn't speak to her again, but instead watched her vital signs stabilize. Her heartbeat, defiant and steady, filled the room like a war drum. Somewhere deep inside he knew she would awaken, and when she did they would speak, not as enemies but as survivors, as leaders of two species now bound by a truth that could never be unlearned. And outside, as the human fleet held formation and the Dominion fleet fell still, the stars bore witness to something more powerful than conquest. Understanding. But not all voices welcomed it. In the shadows of Dominion High Command, others plotted, others watched, others remembered what happened the last time a warlord dared to question the path. And for the first time in centuries, a civil war stirred in the hearts of conquerors. The halls of the Dominion capital vessel, throne of ashes, loomed vast and cold, carved from the bones of dead planets and layered in obsidian plating that shimmered with dark starlight. The great council chamber was silent, save for the low hum of ancient energy cores pulsing beneath the floor. At its center stood Zarxul, warlord of the Eighth Host, his shoulders squared, his blades sheathed, not in surrender, but in conviction. Above him, holographic visages of the High Dominion, a council of faceless overseers, flickered into being, their voices layered with digital distortion and ancient disdain. You defied your mandate. You ceased hostilities. You returned with a human in your custody and offered no trophies of conquest, the central voice boomed, dripping with contempt. Explain your heresy. Zarxul raised his gaze. Because there is no conquest when the conquered refuse to kneel. What I witnessed aboard the Valiant Hope was not weakness. It was strength beyond measure. A strength born not from technology or numbers, but from will. From the human refusal to break. The chamber darkened. Other voices whispered behind the main council like a chorus of buried gods. You sound infected, tainted by the philosophy of the lesser species. Zarxul took a step forward. I am not infected. I am enlightened. You've bred us to kill, to dominate, to erase anything that does not yield. But what if, in our obsession to suppress weakness, we erased the very thing that made us powerful? The silence that followed was not uncertainty. It was calculation. And then, the betrayal struck. From the shadows, a pulse of ionized energy surged, an assassination strike cloaked beneath the council's holograms. Zarxul's reflexes were instant, his axe spinning from his forearm mount to deflect the bolt, but another blast struck him square in the chest. His armor absorbed the brunt, but the shock threw him to the floor, his body convulsing. Out of the darkness stepped Zarxul. I warned you, Warlord, the brute hissed, stepping into the light, his massive frame gleaming with fresh ceremonial plating. You let your mind wander. You let their poison into our bloodline. Zarxul rose, blood oozing from beneath his helmet. And you're here, to finish what I began. No, Zarxul sneered. I'm here to erase it. With a roar he charged, plasma blades spinning. The council did not intervene. They watched, curious, cold. Zarxul met the strike with brutal force. Their blades clashed, sending waves of heat across the chamber, each impact echoing like a thunderclap in a tomb. This was no duel for glory. It was war incarnate. One, warrior fighting for tradition, the other for a future yet unclaimed. As they battled, flashes of memory seared across Zarxul's mind. Commander Vega's defiant stare, the children hiding behind steel walls, the graffiti carved into hulls. That should have been tombs. Still alive, still fighting, still free. Zarxul overpowered him, slamming him against the wall. You were our greatest, and now you're a traitor. Zarxul's breathing was labored, but his voice never faltered. No, I am what you all fear. I've seen the truth, and I chose it. With a roar of finality, he drove his blade, not into Zarxul's heart, but his own shoulder, dragging the brute closer, and used the momentum to deliver a killing strike through Zarxul's chest. The warrior gasped, his expression frozen in shock, then faded into silence. Zarxul collapsed, bleeding and broken, but still standing. The council, silent until now, spoke again. You've killed one of your own. Do you expect us to reward this treason? No, Zarxul said, coughing blood. I don't want your reward. I want you to listen. If we continue down this path of conquest and blind supremacy, we will fall. Not to weapons, but to irrelevance, because the humans, they remember, they hope, they fight, and they will become something greater than we can imagine. The chamber dimmed. Then one by one, the council lights extinguished. No reply, no judgment, only silence. Later, in secret, Zarxul was exiled, not executed. Perhaps the council feared martyrdom more than heresy. He was stripped of title, rank, and name, cast to the edge of the galaxy aboard a derelict scout cruiser, a ghost, a fallen god. But this was not the end. On a quiet moon orbiting a forgotten star, Zarxul nursed his wounds and walked among humans, first as a shadow, then as a teacher. Stories of a strange, towering alien who walked the refugee colonies began to spread, one who carried scars from both sides of the war, one who spoke of peace, of unity, of preparing for something far greater. And deep within the Dominion, fractures formed. Young commanders began questioning orders. Some refused to annihilate fleeing civilians. Others sought out the recordings of Zarxul's final stand. Slowly, dangerously, the idea took root, that perhaps strength was not the absence of mercy, but the ability to choose it. As for Commander Vega, she awoke aboard a hospital vessel orbiting Vega Prime. The first thing she saw was a blade, Zarxul's own war axe mounted beside her bed with a single inscription carved into the steel. "You showed me the cost of victory. Now I seek the value of peace." And in that moment she smiled, because she knew the Warlord had learned what every human carried in their bones. That surrender is not in our nature. Not today, not ever. If this story gripped your imagination, if you felt the fire of rebellion and the weight of sacrifice, then let us know. Smash that like button, share this video with your fellow sci-fi fanatics, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you were the Warlord or the Commander? Would you have chosen peace or vengeance? This galaxy's just getting started, and your voice belongs in it.